Right, let's get going. Stefan could make it, and I know it's late and stuff, so I'd rather get going. And if others can join us, that's great. If not, they'll get to listen to the recording later. Right. So before I start working on Learning Unit 2 with you guys, you should be done with Learning Unit 1 by now. I just wanted to know if you guys had any questions or anything you wanted clarity on with Learning Unit 1, or if you're a bit behind, if there's something you're working on currently that you just need a bit of guidance with just before I hop on to the next learning unit. Any questions about Learning Unit 1 that you might have? I obviously will be going through how it relates to your practical assignment, but it's still a long way away. Okay, cool. All right, just remembering 26th of September. Yeah, so we still got over a month away. So I'll start dealing with it on the next collab. All right, so then let's move on to Learning Unit 2, specifically focusing on Theme 1. Because if we go by the pacer, you guys should be working on Theme 1 currently, which is looking at, it's our first introduction to the concept of our global south. And why this is important is to understand that when we are looking at the world around us, when we're assessing media and we're assessing how we are represented as a country and as a people and what have you, it's very much divided into north and south. I just want to spread this out for us. So the idea is that we end up dividing our world into not necessarily physical north and south, because we have countries like Australia and that don't necessarily fit the global south pattern, but we have ourselves as well as, say, South America, and pretty much all those countries that have got some colonial influence. Oz technically does fall into that category, but they didn't seem to be as negatively impacted in the same way as us. Not saying that they don't have some remnants of the past, but also we have countries that are north of the equator of our physical south that also fall, that are north that fall within our global south. So what's important here is to think about where colonization has taken place, which aspects of or which places within our world have had that influence and have had their autonomy taken away from them at some stage, which influenced obviously the way in which they have interacted and engaged with media. So when we look at when broadcasting began in Africa, obviously when we talk about broadcasting, when we look into the past, we are looking at radio, and then much later TV. And the in different parts of the world, different access. So I don't know if you guys have been doing some research into this, comparing us to other countries and when broadcasting actually began in Africa. What were you guys able to find out? Have you guys got onto theme 1? Okay. What I want to know is, must I talk about with you guys doing future research? As in, you're still going to look it up. So Bernice, you haven't researched yet. Pule, what do you like? Have you looked into our global south That's the words that I was trying to think of. Just because then I know which way to attack our discussion tonight. Okay. I'm going to go on the premise that you guys haven't looked into things rather than assuming knowledge that isn't necessarily there, because I think that'll be then more beneficial, especially Bernice, if you haven't had that time. Okay, you've just been skimming through. Okay, cool. All right, so like I said, it is obviously, when we talk about broadcast, that obviously focuses specifically on radio and TV. Print is your newspapers, magazines, and everything that you guys have learned from Journ. So the reason why broadcasting is so significant is that radio in particular was and is still used as a form of control and a form of um, oppression within our global south. So for some of our countries within Africa that have got democratic freedom, obviously radio is a means of communication for bringing people together, making sure that we are getting accurate, truthful information out to the public and what have you. But in other parts of Africa, media or broadcast media specifically is still being used as a political tool to influence and spread propaganda, political agenda, and what have you. So while some countries have been able to move past this and work within a democratic system now, that is not applicable to everyone. And why this is important to remember is that we have a tendency within Africa for us to compare and contrast ourselves to other countries, forgetting that we all became democratic countries at different times within our history. Some still are not free and democratic. There's still either a militant control or government control, political, like a communist state. And we've got to remember that all this technology, this is like the big debate that a lot of people have, is that a lot of people that are pro-colonialism say, well, Africa wouldn't be as developed as it is if the colonialists hadn't come in and brought this technology, if they hadn't brought the knowledge on radio and newspapers and magazines and all that. Do you think that is the case? Do you think that we, as a continent, and I know that's a big number of people for me to be stereotyping and generalizing with, do you really think that we would have not grown and developed if we didn't have colonial influence? What do you guys think? Just want your perspectives. Okay, so the thing is that when we look at places like China, Japan, and all that, their development wasn't determined by colonial influence. It's that it's more determined by trade, not being taken over and saying, we will run you now. So we would have developed in our own way. We would have, um, there would have been global movement eventually if we had chosen to be part of it. There's so many parts of this world that were not colonized that still have high levels of development and connectivity and media ownership and use and all that. That for people to say that we wouldn't have any form of media, we wouldn't be successful within our media, is quite a narrow-minded perspective to take. But it's safe to say that because of colonialism, it did happen quicker. It happened with a lot more force, but it was again used as a form of control because it was the colonizers coming in and educating the native people. I use air quotes, I know you can't see them, but educating them to the level that they wanted so that they could understand and they could listen and they could read, mostly missionaries and the Bible and that kind of thing. But then as it developed, it was still used as a tool of oppression for a very long time. And the broadcasts were not about being broadcasting content in their own language of whichever country you're in. It was more initially about broadcasting in English, promoting this colonial way of life. And then if things were done in the local language, it would be very much promoting, again, this colonial way of life. So it's that, I mean, to the point where um, in the apartheid era, TVs were not introduced until much later. Evening, Aaron. TVs were not introduced until much, much later than they should have been because the government, no problem, the government was so scared that by having TVs, having that broadcast, that it would take power and control away from the ruling party. So it was that they didn't feel like they had enough control over TV or enough understanding to control it, manipulate it in a way that suited them to push their narrative of oppression and propaganda and what have you. So it's important to remember that for some people, our media and where we are now, some people do have negative connotations because of our past and because of how media was used, how it was a tool for pushing colonial authority, and also that some people, well, a large number of people, not even with our digital age, but even just in the past, were mistrusting of our media in the global south because the information being received from the media was never a true reflection of reality. It's only when, we have this democratic environment where technically the media is meant to be used for unity and distribution of accurate information, that then we should see a shift. But if we look at our radio of the past and today, it's mostly works by the same system. So we still use our broadcast system with our FM and our AM. But how has radio shifted past to present? What are some ways that TV and radio, not so broadcast, how have they changed today from the past? What is accessible now that wasn't before? What's been some of our biggest influences? What do you guys think? What's the biggest difference between now and the past? The internet, guys. So while we still have our traditional forms of broadcasting and we have our traditional TV channels, our SABCs, our ETVs, we still use AM, FM, we now have a digital environment that has significantly impacted in terms of um, our reach, but also in terms of highlighting the haves and the have-nots, because it's those that are able to use digital media, whether whatever form of streaming it is, whether it's radio, whether it's Netflix, Showmax, Disney Plus, even the SABCs with streaming. What is important to understand is that what now it does is it's only those that have access to data, Wi-Fi, those connectivities that influence the type of media that we receive. So those that are in more rural areas, that the that past colonial influence of, not having proper full infrastructure, or where colonialists came in, took over, and just left without establishing society correctly, or giving people the tools to continue. We have these issues that those past indiscretions are being highlighted because of the lack of um, reach and accessibility within our global south. So infrastructure within certain areas is obviously promoted and developed, but where there are less people, where there is less financial wealth, we obviously don't see those. We don't see the cell phone towers going up. We don't see our data costs going down because our cell phone companies have a monopoly over us. So while the concepts are still the same, these technological advancements are very significant, and how we as a country and how we as a global south interact with the internet and our um, what's the correct word, our um, bias still towards Western media as opposed to our own media. So I know that's, in South Africa in particular, we still have, a significant number of people that will watch international stuff before local stuff. We will continually have ourselves being seen as less than. And then it's only in certain circumstances, such as when we have like genres of music, like when Amapiano started to become popular, that we started to embrace something that is of us, that is ours, but it's only because internationally it started to get embraced. Example, if we think about when the Olympians came home, our Olympic swimmers who received medals, there was no media there to televise. There were no, big welcome home, congratulation parties and all that. But when the Springboks come, we do have it. And that's also because of past influences and, those, I'm trying to get my words right here, how certain sports have been built up within South Africa. And some of those are from past colonial ways, such as rugby. And it's still held to such a high regard in terms of our media and how much coverage we have during rugby World Cups and all that, compared to, say, Olympic swimming, even football, or soccer, whichever you want to call it, which is more of our own sport, does not get the same coverage as rugby, even though we would assume they would. I don't know if it's just because our players are not the greatest, but it's a question of where broadcasting, where focus is placed based on trends of the past going forward to the future. Am I making sense, guys? I feel like I'm rambling, but I want to know if it's. I'm trying to talk about how certain colonial influences are still prevalent, still present today. Okay, so I'm making some sense. Okay, so then the last thing, like I was saying, is looking at poverty and inequality. And this is something that's very important for you guys when you're looking at theme one, is to look at, now again, not only South Africa, but other countries as well, and how our media is still, like I was saying earlier, very much about where we saw influence, or where the colonialists put prominence or importance on certain provinces or areas or whatever, how we see a continual trend of development in those areas, and poverty and inequality, and the poverty and inequality gets highlighted because those areas that are struggling still do not get the significant influence. So there will be funding into local radio stations in maybe a CBD-based area or into a province that has a bit more money, but your more rural areas won't get that same kind of funding. And there have been a lot of programs where they're trying to get your local radio stations up and running, but the funding is just not there to maintain it, even though there is a need and there is a necessity for our media to reach the more rural areas, and they are needing media that is relevant to them, not only stuff that's coming from bigger cities that they're getting, the drips and drabs of the outside. So our poverty and our inequality gets highlighted quite significantly, especially in Africa, because when we think about how we are represented in Western media, we always what? The mercenaries, we all poor, living in um, like we're not living in brick houses, um, living not having computers yet we're talking to people online. We are depicted as backward, as that the colonialists were our saviors. And I know I am a white woman, so I am, you know, a product or byproduct of colonial immigration, not immigration. Wow, I'm doing well with my words. Colonial influence. Okay, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for some Afrikaner families moving to South Africa, um, but or Dutch families, should I say? But it's that those viewpoints of the past are still being perpetuated, even when we refer to ourselves. Um, when I think of people like Trevor Noah, who gets to hold a global stage, even when he talks about South Africa and certain issues that we're dealing with and whatever, when he brings in his comedy, he often portrays South Africans as not as intelligent, or he will change his accent to make it dumbed down. I say again with air quotes that you can't see. But then, yes, he also talks up South Africa a lot and does bring a lot of awareness to the country and all that. But it's about, I understand there's this comedy platform and we are um, meant to be, there's certain liberties that you can take. But at the same time, if you are using the problems within our country in your comedy skit in a way that is demeaning, that becomes problematic. And what you guys need to look at is, so obviously the South African context is something we're very familiar with, but what I want you to also look at is other Southern African countries and how the media is reaching those poorer communities, or how that country is working to fight inequality or poverty, are trying to reach their audience in a broader context. Maybe they have put programs in place to educate the younger generations. Maybe they have done outreach programs or put infrastructure into areas which have before been overlooked. I want you guys to look at how other countries are actually either doing something similar to South Africa because of our past influence, or if they are doing stuff better than us to try and use technology to improve media reach and our media's the use of local media within their own countries. Does that also make sense? So they're not only relying or wanting constant Western media, but they're wanting their own media. Yes. So it's about, because this is what it is that we tend to gravitate towards our internationals and we don't look at the locals. So we don't look at our local shows. We don't look at um, how our local shows are dealing with technological developments or how they're choosing to be distributed to the people of using South Africa as an example. So it's like how a lot of people, when Severed Alone was shut down as a production, they said it was just too costly and it's not the right demographic and all that kind of thing. But they were dealing with issues of like with transgender and domestic abuse, and they were dealing with, and like their show, even though it was a soapy, they were dealing with very current affairs. They were bringing in multiple different cultures. They were bringing in technology in a different way to reach a younger audience. They were actually trying to do things to actually keep up to date. Where we have shows like Top Billing, I don't know if you guys remember that one, that was very much about promoting affluence, promoting a particular way of life, and it got shut down because it wasn't a true reflection of South Africa. It was a reflection of the 1% of the 1%. And what it was doing is it was highlighting the poverty and inequality in South Africa. It was, how could you have a show that was meant, that is basically making people feel less than in a very extreme way, when we are in a country where one side of the road you have multi-million rand homes in an estate, and the other side you have shacks and people living below the poverty line. So that's why shows like Top Billing, which cost a lot to run and also highlighted the issues, and again it was very reminiscent of our um, colonial influence, that they said, okay, this show is inappropriate now. It's not actually applicable. It does not actually reach a wide enough audience. It's done. So you have to think about how our media now is either working towards lessening our inequality and trying to um, bring South Africans together, or Nigerians, or Zimbabweans, or um, Namibians, or whatever. What is that media doing to unify rather than bring apart? Because colonialism was very much about dominance, power, and control, where if that country now works in a process of democracy, it should be about equality, freedom, accessibility. But now we know for a fact that that's not true in all of our countries across the global south, because we still have a lot of countries that don't get that democratic freedom. And that's obviously going to influence the media and how technology is used. Also, it's not necessarily because of colonialism, it's because of political control due to, well, not because of current colonialism, but there is the shift to political control because of the past, saying we will not let go because we will never let someone else control us. So then there's the swing in the other direction, where we have political control directly influencing the media. So with this particular theme, you very much need to understand the political landscape, not only looking at South Africa, but looking at other African countries, and even spreading your views to, because we're talking about the global south, you can also look at like countries within South America as well, as a juxtaposition or comparison to how we in Africa deal with it. But what you're needing to look at is how political entities are using our media, as well as the use of technology within the global south. Those are your main focus areas. Does that make sense? The rest of you? right, and then I just want to speak to what you must be doing next week, okay? And that is looking at audience research. Now, what I really would like you guys to do is want you to, again, look at how other countries and see what you can find for our next collab about how other countries, as well as South Africa, use the audience as research. So how much do they rely on audience, like viewership? Do they actually do focus groups where they take audience views into consideration? What the significance is of understanding our audience and those that consume the media? I want you to be very cognizant of why it's important, or what the relevance is of understanding the audience with the purpose of shifting and trying to be more relevant to the audience that is receiving the media. So for our next collab, look at South Africa and how we use our audience, but try and look at 2 other countries and see if they actually take the audience into consideration, or if it's very much a monopoly where the audience is ignored and what is produced within the media is for, again, political control rather than producing media that suits the audience. Okay, so I am giving you a bit of homework as it is, but it is your theme too for next week. So, but again, don't only look at SA, but look at 2 other countries as well, because different parts of Africa handle audience feedback and research very differently because of what they're trying to, if they're trying to achieve transparent two-way communication, or if they are trying to control and oversee or manipulate a population, because we know that the media has the ability to do that. Okay, so try to find a country that is democratic and try to find a country that isn't, or says they're democratic, but actually when we look at, you know, how they engage with the audience, maybe it shows how they actually aren't. Okay, so is that good? You guys understand? Okay, any questions from you guys? Bernice, I'm going to send out, now that we've had a couple of weeks, I'm going to set, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a due date. I've just been trying to work out with assessments and all that. So our ISOS is going to be due in October, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a September, like a midway ISTask date, that you can get as many of your ISTasks done for feedback by that date. And I can give you feedback. Otherwise, the final due date will be in October sometime. So I'm going to send out an announcement tomorrow with a midway due date for those who would like some feedback. Cool. And then the final one, I don't have the due date for yet because they haven't told us when it needs to be in. Okay. But I will send out that announcement tomorrow. I just wanted everyone to get into the swing of the modules before setting that date. Okay. Okay, guys. Then if there's nothing from you, there's nothing else from me for tonight. Good luck working through Learning Unit 2.